Evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it lives right next door. Tonight, we're uncovering 3 true stories that will make you question everyone around you. These aren't myths. These aren't movies. These are real people, real crimes, real tragedies. By the end of tonight, you'll see, evil doesn't knock. Sometimes it just sits across from you at the dinner table. He left behind a letter that said, "I don't plan to live very much longer, just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction." Hours later, those words came true. What followed was one of America's most disturbing massacres, a day when a failed trader named Mark Barton turned his rage into bloodshed, leaving behind a trail of bodies and a city frozen in shock. It was a hot Thursday afternoon, July 29, 1999, in Atlanta, Georgia. At around 2:30 p.m., the glass doors of Momentum Securities opened, and a familiar face walked in. Mark Orrin Barton, 44, looked calm and ordinary. To most people in that room, he was a regular trader and disappeared for a few weeks. Nobody imagined he'd come back with 2 loaded pistols hidden under his shirt. He stopped at the front desk and asked if the branch manager was in. The receptionist told him the manager was out but would return soon. Barton nodded, thanked her, and wandered to the coffee area. He chatted casually with other traders, made small talk about the market's decline, even joked about how bearish the week had been. He looked relaxed, almost too relaxed. For nearly 30 minutes, Barton paced the floor, glancing at the clock, speaking softly to anyone who met his eyes. Then he walked toward the break room, where office manager Kevin Dial was taking a quick lunch. Barton's voice was calm when he spoke. "It's a bad trading day," he said, "and it's about to get worse." Before anyone could respond, Barton reached beneath his shirt, drew 2 handguns, and fired. The sound of gunfire shattered the hum of the trading floor. Dial collapsed instantly. People froze in disbelief as Barton stepped out of the break room and began firing across the room. The next few seconds were chaos. Monitors exploded, papers flew through the air, and screams echoed down the hallways. He moved with frightening control, shooting anyone who moved, his expression blank, his pace deliberate. Some traders ducked behind desks, others ran for the back doors. A few pretended to be dead, lying motionless on the floor, while Barton walked past them, firing again. One witness would later describe it as, like watching someone sweep through a field. He didn't look angry, just determined. Within minutes, 4 people were dead. Barton reloaded his pistols, walked to the exit, and left as calmly as he had arrived. Outside, he climbed into his green minivan, started the engine, and drove down the street as police sirens began to build in the distance. But he wasn't finished. Just a few blocks away stood Alltech Investment Group, another day trading firm where Barton had once traded before losing thousands of dollars. Inside, the co-founder, Brent Doonan, was in a meeting when a secretary peeked in and whispered that Mark Barton was waiting for him. Doonan smiled. "Maybe he's back with my money," he joked, unaware that Barton had already murdered several people minutes earlier. When Barton entered, he greeted Doonan warmly. "Hey, Brent, you got a minute? Come here, you're gonna love this." They stepped into a small office together. Barton closed the door and lowered the blinds. Then, with a sudden change in tone, he said, "Today is going to be visual." Before Doonan could react, Barton raised his pistols and opened fire. The first bullet tore through Doonan's chest, and he crumpled to the floor. Barton stepped back into the hallway and began shooting at anyone he saw. The sound of gunfire ripped through the building. Workers ducked behind cubicles, glass shattered, alarms blared. Barton moved slowly, methodically, firing at close range. "I hope this doesn't ruin your trading day," he shouted as he shot another victim. Back inside the office, Doonan struggled to breathe. Blood soaked through his shirt as he tried to crawl toward the door. When he saw Barton's back turned, he used what strength he had left and charged. The two collided, crashing into the wall. Barton twisted, fired again, and Doonan felt 3 more bullets tear into his side. Somehow, he stayed conscious. Doonan stumbled into the hallway, clutching his wounds, while Barton turned to shoot at a woman running for the exit. The shot missed her and shattered her computer screen. Traders screamed and scattered as Barton reloaded. Doonan dragged himself toward the service elevator. His hands smeared blood on the wall as he pressed the button repeatedly. The doors opened, and another employee, Vadawati Muraladhara, sprinted toward him. In that instant, Barton appeared at the end of the hall and shot her in the head. The elevator doors closed just as he turned his gun toward Doonan. Upstairs, Doonan stumbled out into another office filled with strangers. "He's shooting people downstairs," he gasped. "Lock the doors." The workers hesitated, unsure whether to believe him until they saw the blood soaking through his clothes. They barricaded the entrance, called 911, and tried to stop the bleeding with paper towels. It had been barely 15 minutes since Barton had fired the first shot at Momentum Securities. In that short span, he had killed 9 people and wounded more than a dozen others in 2 different buildings. Police dispatchers were flooded with calls. The first reports were confused. 2 shootings, possibly connected. Same suspect driving a green minivan. Units rushed to both locations. By the time the first officers reached Alltech, Barton was gone. He merged onto the highway, blending into rush hour traffic, heading south toward his home in Stockbridge, where his wife and 2 young children lived. When police arrived at his apartment complex later that evening, they knocked on the door. No answer. They forced their way in. The air was still, heavy, silent. In the master bedroom closet, they found the body of Leanne Barton, wrapped in a blanket. In the children's bedroom, 11-year-old Matthew and 8-year-old Michelle were tucked neatly into their beds, their heads resting on their pillows, as if asleep. Each had been beaten to death with a hammer. A small teddy bear rested in Michelle's arms. Beside Matthew was his favorite toy truck. Notes were placed on their bodies. "I give you Michelle Elizabeth Barton, my daughter, my sweetheart, my life. Please take care of her." Another read, "I give you Matthew David Barton, my son, my buddy, my life. Please take care of him." On the coffee table in the living room sat a typed letter. It was addressed to whom it may concern. "Leanne is in the master bedroom closet under a blanket. I killed her on Tuesday night. I killed Matthew and Michelle Wednesday night. There may be similarities between these deaths and the death of my first wife, Deborah. However, I deny killing her and her mother. There is no reason for me to lie now." He explained how he struck them while they slept, then placed them in the bathtub to make sure they didn't wake up in pain. He wrote that he hated life, that fear consumed him, and that he killed his children to spare them a lifetime of suffering. "I don't plan to live very much longer," the letter read. "Just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction." By the time investigators found that note, Mark Barton was already gone. At Grady Memorial Hospital, Brent Doonan was in surgery. He had been shot 5 times in the chest, arm, and shoulder, but he was alive. Doctors worked through the night, removing part of a rib and repairing his diaphragm. Against all odds, he would survive. When the final report came in, police confirmed what few wanted to believe. The killings at the offices and the murders at Barton's home were connected. One man, driven by rage and despair, had destroyed everything around him. What no one yet understood was why. To understand how Mark Barton reached that breaking point, investigators went back to the beginning. He was born on April 2nd, 1955, in Stockbridge, Georgia, the only child of Truman and Gladys Barton. His father served in the Air Force, and the family moved often, finally settling in South Carolina. Mark grew up quiet, distant, more interested in books than people. Those who knew him as a boy described him as intelligent but detached, someone who rarely showed emotion. As a teenager, he experimented with drugs, mostly psychedelics, and suffered several overdoses that landed him in the hospital. Still, he finished school, attended Clemson University, and later transferred to the University of South Carolina, earning a chemistry degree in 1979. For a while, it looked as if he had built a stable life. After graduation, he moved back to Georgia and married his longtime girlfriend, Deborah Spivey, a kind, soft-spoken woman who balanced out his seriousness. They settled near Atlanta, and in 1988, their first child, Matthew, was born. 3 years later came Michelle. To outsiders, they looked like an ordinary middle-class family: 2 children, a promising career, and a house filled with laughter. That picture began to crack when Barton's company relocated him to Alabama. The move isolated him from friends and family, and coworkers noticed how uneasy he seemed. He started complaining about colleagues talking behind his back, neighbors watching him, even the phone lines being tapped. The paranoia soon focused on Deborah. He accused her of cheating, threatened to take the children, and grew controlling and unpredictable. Deborah confided to friends that she was scared. She told her father, Bill Spivey, that a good day is when Mark doesn't speak to me. She thought about divorce, but worried how far he might go if she left. By 1993, things had worsened. Barton had been fired from the chemical company he co-founded. One night, he broke into the office to sabotage computer files and was arrested for burglary. He spent a short time in jail, but the company chose not to press full charges. The arrest humiliated him and deepened his resentment toward anyone he thought had betrayed him, including Deborah. Around the same time, Barton started an affair with a much younger secretary named Leanne Vandiver. She was 20, married, and flattered by his attention. When Deborah found out, she was furious, but not surprised. Barton promised Leanne he would divorce soon, and even took out a $600,000 life insurance policy on Deborah. That summer, Deborah planned a Labor Day camping trip with her mother, Eloise Spivey, at Riverside Campground in Cedar Bluff, Alabama. Barton stayed home with the children. When Bill Spivey didn't hear from his wife or daughter, he called the campground and asked someone to check on them. The discovery was horrific. Both women were dead inside the camper, killed with brutal force. Blood covered the floor and walls. Jewelry and cash lay untouched. Investigators found a .32 caliber pistol on the counter, still loaded. Whoever attacked them hadn't stolen anything. They had come to kill. When Barton arrived at the scene with Bill Spivey, his reaction was cold. He didn't ask what happened or express grief. He simply looked around and said, I've never been here before." His alibi quickly fell apart. He claimed he'd stayed home all day, but a neighbor saw his car leave that afternoon and return near midnight, just enough time to drive to Alabama and back. Confronted, Barton changed his story twice, shopping, then job hunting, before demanding a lawyer. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him, but detectives never forgot his demeanor. At Deborah's funeral, he left early, climbing into Leanne's red car while his children stood beside their grandfather. A few months later, he married Leanne. Bill Spivey tried to get custody of Matthew and Michelle, but court sided with their biological father. Barton cut off nearly all contact between the children and Deborah's family. By 1994, he collected the insurance payout, about $450,000 after legal disputes, and began investing heavily in day trading. He treated it like salvation, a way to rebuild his image, prove his brilliance, and erase suspicion. At first, he was lucky. Traders nicknamed him Rocket Man for his enthusiasm. But his wins fed his ego, and he started taking bigger risks. Within a few years, the money was gone. By 1999, Barton was drowning in debt, nearly $100,000 owed to Momentum Securities and more to Alltech, the two firms he would later target. Friends noticed he looked exhausted, jittery, always talking about conspiracies in the market. At home, Leanne's patience was fading. She told investigators later that he was moody, sometimes frightening. She wanted to leave, but worried he'd hurt her or the kids. She wasn't wrong. In the spring of 1999, Momentum Securities revoked his account after one of his checks bounced. He calmly said he understood and left, but rage simmered beneath the surface. Within days, he opened another account across the street at Alltech Investment Group, lying about his experience and debt. When Alltech learned the truth and also closed his account, Barton's final grip on stability snapped. He spent the next few weeks plotting revenge. He kept trading from home, pretending life was normal. To neighbors, he still smiled and waved. No one guessed that inside the apartment, he was planning the murders of everyone he blamed for his downfall. On Tuesday, July 27th, he killed Leanne as she slept. 2 nights later, he took Matthew and Michelle out for dinner and bought them toys at Walmart. That night, he tucked them into bed, kissed them goodnight, and struck them with a hammer. He wrote his confessions afterward, stacking the notes carefully as if arranging evidence for police. When he left for Atlanta the next morning, their bodies were still in the apartment. The manhunt, within an hour. His name and photograph were broadcast nationwide. Every police unit in Georgia was on alert. Helicopters hovered over highways, and roadblocks appeared at city exits. People were told to lock their doors. Just before 8 p.m., a patrolman named Huel Clements spotted a green minivan on Interstate 75 near the town of Ackworth. He read the license plate aloud to dispatch. The response came back instantly. It was Mark Barton. Clements followed at a distance while calling for backup. Barton drove calmly, not speeding, his hazard lights flashing faintly in the dusk. He exited onto Highway 92, passing restaurants and gas stations, then turned into a Shell station beside a car wash. As Clements pulled in behind him, additional units boxed the van from the front. Officers stepped out with weapons drawn. "Mark Barton, step out of the vehicle," Clements shouted. Through the windshield, they could see Barton sitting perfectly still. Then he lifted both hands, holding a .45 caliber pistol in one and a 9mm in the other. He pressed them to his temples and, without hesitation, pulled the triggers. The double gunshot echoed across the parking lot. His body fell forward onto the steering wheel, the van idling for a moment before stalling. It was over. In total, 12 people were dead. 9 from the office shootings, 3 from his own family, and more than a dozen wounded. The man who had once been described as the friendly trader with a big smile had carried out one of the worst workplace massacres in American history, ended with suicide. Inside his van, police found extra ammunition, clean clothes, and a list of names, people he believed had wronged him. Former colleagues, firm managers, business partners. Most of the names were already crossed out. Back at the apartment, investigators reread his confession. In it, Barton hinted at older crimes, writing about his first wife Deborah and her mother. Detectives quickly realized He was referring to an unsolved double homicide from 1993 in Alabama, a case that had gone cold years earlier. As night fell, Atlanta was silent, except for the whir of helicopters circling above. The rest of the story, the massacre, the manhunt, his suicide, played out exactly as he'd planned. The nation woke up to headlines calling him the Day Trader Killer, a man who wiped out 12 lives in a single day. After the shootings, investigators pored through Barton's writings and his past. They found journals filled with paranoia, pages describing fear of poisonous gases, of people reading his mind. He believed co-workers were plotting against him and that financial companies had ruined him deliberately. Police also revisited the 1993 Alabama case. Advances in DNA testing helped confirm what they already believed. Barton's involvement was beyond doubt, though the evidence was now largely circumstantial. Even without a trial, everyone agreed he had killed his first wife and mother-in-law 6 years before turning on his second family. The connection was devastating for those who had known him. Bill Spivey, who had lost his daughter and wife, said if they'd stopped him back then, 12 more people would still be alive. He spent the rest of his life haunted by that thought. At Grady Hospital, Brent Doonan slowly recovered. He underwent multiple surgeries, learning to breathe without part of a rib and diaphragm. Months later, he met with families of the victims and told them he was alive for all of us who didn't make it. In 2006, he published a book titled Murder at the Office, chronicling his survival and the man who nearly ended his life. As investigators wrapped up the case, they tried to answer one last question: why kill his own children? The answer lay in the last lines of his note. Barton wrote that he wanted to spare them from a world of fear, that the fear of the father is passed to the son. It was twisted logic, an attempt to justify murder as mercy. He died believing he had reclaimed control, when in truth, he had lost it long before the first shot was fired. Leanne's sister, Dana Reeves, spoke publicly a year later. She said she still couldn't reconcile the man her sister fell for with the monster in the headlines. He fooled everyone. She said, even her. Barton's mother struggled with public anger. I can't understand what he did, she told a reporter, but I forgive him. Many couldn't. By the 10th anniversary of the massacre, both trading firms were gone. Momentum Securities dissolved. Alltech quietly disbanded. The offices still stand, empty most days, reminders of what happened inside. Mark Orrin Barton began life as a promising chemist and ended it as a murderer whose fear consumed everyone he touched. And when investigators finally closed the case file, they left behind a single line in their summary. He blamed the world for his failures. And when it didn't break him, he chose to break it himself. It was a peaceful night in a quiet Australian town until screams shattered the silence. When police arrived, they found a young woman bleeding, covered in stab wounds, barely alive. Her home showed no signs of forced entry. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. She was terrified, but she whispered one name before losing consciousness. What happened inside that house? Who wanted her dead, and why? Dr. Angela J. was the kind of woman people instantly trusted. At just 28, she had built a successful career as an anaesthetist in New South Wales, Australia. Intelligent, driven, and kind, she was respected by her colleagues and adored by her patients. Outside of work, she lived quietly, enjoying coffee with friends, yoga classes, and long walks near the coast. To anyone who met her, she seemed to have life perfectly balanced. But even the most careful hearts can be caught off guard. In early 2016, Angela joined a dating app, hoping to meet someone genuine. That's where she came across Paul Lambert. He was in his mid-30s, charming, polite, and attentive. His messages were thoughtful, never rushed. He asked about her work, her family, her dreams. He seemed like a man who truly listened. Within days, they were talking for hours. Within weeks, they were calling each other every night. Paul told Angela he was a tradesman from Perth who had recently moved to Tasmania for work. His stories sounded ordinary, believable. He seemed grounded, emotionally open, and constantly assured her how lucky he felt to have met her. He sent long texts each morning, simple messages like, "You make my days brighter." To Angela, it felt refreshing, even healing. She'd gone through heartbreak before, and Paul made her feel wanted again. When she introduced him to her family through a video call, her mother described him as charming, but her stepfather wasn't convinced. He said something about the man didn't feel right, too perfect, too polished. Angela smiled and dismissed it. For months, their relationship unfolded online. Paul was affectionate, generous, and endlessly interested. When he visited New South Wales to see her, the chemistry was real. They went out for dinners, stayed by the ocean, and spoke about a future together. Paul said he wanted to move closer, maybe start fresh near her. Everything seemed right, until it didn't. The first signs came quietly. Paul began to question her more often. Who she was with, what time she'd be home, why she hadn't replied yet. His tone shifted from soft to sharp. When Angela mentioned plans with friends, he grew distant, replying with short, cold messages. Soon, the compliments were replaced with guilt. If she didn't respond fast enough, he'd accuse her of not caring. If she didn't answer a call, he'd text, "I guess I don't matter anymore." When she tried to reassure him, he'd apologize, promise he was just having a bad day, and shower her with affection again. It became a pattern. Warmth, then anger, then guilt. Angela's friends began to notice. She sounded drained, tense, like she was always walking on eggshells. When they asked if everything was all right, she said Paul just loved deeply. But love doesn't demand control. And Paul's love was becoming control in disguise. By the middle of the year, his behavior had escalated. He wanted to know her schedule hour by hour. He started showing up unannounced, once waiting outside her workplace. Angela felt uneasy, but hoped it was just temporary. Then came the first threat. One evening, during an argument over text, Paul sent a chilling message, "If you leave me, I'll kill myself." Angela froze. She didn't know what to say. She tried to calm him down, terrified he might actually do it. But over the next few weeks, he used the same threat again and again, every time she pulled away, every time she tried to set boundaries. Then, one night, his tone changed. He stopped pleading and started blaming. "You ruined my life," he wrote. "You'll regret this." Angela blocked his number, hoping it would end there. But the next morning, a new message appeared, from a different account. Then another. He created multiple profiles to reach her, alternating between apologies and rage. That's when Angela realized she wasn't just being harassed, she was being stalked. She went to the police. She brought screenshots of the threats, the messages, and the phone logs. The officer listened and took notes. He advised her to block him again and told her she could apply for an apprehended violence order, Australia's version of a restraining order. Angela agreed. For the first time, she said the words out loud, "I'm scared of him." The paperwork went through quickly, and she was told to contact police if he tried to reach her again. She left the station relieved but uneasy. Paul had already crossed lines before, and a piece of paper wouldn't stop him. For the next few days, things went quiet. She went back to work, tried to focus, tried to convince herself it was over. She told her parents she felt calmer. She even posted a photo at the beach with a caption about new beginnings, but far away. In Tasmania, Paul was spiraling. Friends later said he became withdrawn, spending hours online ranting about betrayal and revenge. He told people Angela had ruined him. But what no one realized was that he was already planning what he would do next. In early November, Paul began preparing for a trip. He packed a duffel bag with clothes, duct tape, a knife, zip ties, and a can of gasoline. He withdrew cash and bought a ferry ticket to mainland Australia. Before leaving, he posted a message on social media that read, "No more pain, just peace." He boarded the ferry and spent the journey alone. Surveillance footage later showed him sitting silently, staring out at the dark water. In his mind, he wasn't running from heartbreak. He was running toward revenge. When Paul arrived in New South Wales, he checked into a cheap motel under a false name. Over the next few days, he stayed quiet. He didn't contact Angela. He didn't call anyone. He spent his time driving around her neighborhood, learning her routines, waiting. Meanwhile, Angela started to feel that something wasn't right. She noticed small things: footsteps outside at night, unfamiliar cars parked near her home. Her gut told her Paul might be nearby, but she didn't want to seem paranoid. Then came the calls, a blocked number, late at night. She didn't answer, but the silence on the other end felt like a warning. At work, she confided in a colleague that she still felt uneasy. "I think he might be here," she said. The colleague urged her to contact police again, but Angela decided to wait. She didn't want to believe he was capable of coming all this way. But he was already there. On the evening of November 3rd, Paul parked his car a few houses away from Angela's home. He waited until the lights inside dimmed. Then he walked toward the door, holding his phone in one hand and a knife in the other. At 8:45 p.m., Angela received a text from an unknown number. "Please, just talk to me." She ignored it. Then came another. "I just want to say goodbye." Her heart sank. She recognized the tone, the guilt, the manipulation. But this time, it felt closer, more immediate. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. Angela froze. The knock came again, louder. She peeked through the window. No one. Her pulse quickened. She backed away slowly. A third knock. Then silence. She stood still, barely breathing. Her phone buzzed again. One final message. "I'm here." Angela dialed 000, whispering that her ex-partner might be outside her house. The operator told her to stay on the line. But by the time the police arrived, Paul was gone. They searched the area, found nothing, and reassured her she was safe for the night. But Angela couldn't sleep. She locked every door, checked every window, and sat awake until sunrise. She didn't know that Paul was still nearby, watching, waiting, planning his next move. After the police gone, the knock came again, harder this time. Angela froze in place, staring at the door. Her hands were shaking. Every instinct told her to stay quiet, but the sound of footsteps outside grew closer. Before she could move, the door burst open. Paul Lambert stepped inside. He looked different, unrecognizable. His calm smile was gone, replaced by something cold and detached. Angela stumbled backward, shouting his name, demanding to know what he was doing there. But he said nothing. In his hand was a knife. In his eyes, pure hatred. He lunged forward. Angela turned and ran toward the back door, but he caught her, slamming her against the wall. She screamed, fighting to push him away. He stabbed her once in the chest, then again in the thigh. The pain was sharp, but the adrenaline was stronger. She managed to break free and sprinted toward the stairs. Paul chased after her, shouting incoherently. She grabbed her phone, trying to call for help, but he grabbed it and threw it across the room. Then, suddenly, she remembered something. Don't freeze. Angela turned and faced him. Paul, stop. You don't have to do this. Her voice was steady, calm. She knew she needed to keep him talking. Angela ran. She bolted through the front door, barefoot and bleeding, and sprinted into the street. Paul followed for a few steps, then stopped. His breathing was heavy, his hands shaking, his clothes covered in blood. She screamed for help, pounding on the neighbor's door. Lights flicked on. A man opened the door, saw the blood, and immediately pulled her inside. His wife called emergency services while he locked the doors and grabbed towels to press against her wounds. Angela's voice was clear despite the pain. She gave her address, her attacker's name, and told the operator he's still out there. Police arrived within minutes. They found Angela conscious but covered in blood. She had been stabbed more than 10 times, but somehow she was still alert. She told officers it was Paul Lambert. He came here to kill me. Police across New South Wales were alerted. Roadblocks went up. Helicopters searched from above. By morning, his car was spotted near the town of Bonneville, about 3 hours north of where the attack happened. When officers approached, Paul refused to surrender. A short chase followed, ending when he lost control of the vehicle and crashed into an embankment. As officers surrounded the car, he refused to surrender and try to attack. They heard a single gunshot. Paul Lambert was dead. Inside the vehicle were his belongings, the same bag of weapons, duct tape, and notes about Angela's home and workplace. The threat was finally over, but the damage he left behind would last forever. Back in Port Macquarie, Angela was rushed to the hospital where she worked. Only this time, she was the patient. Her colleagues fought to stabilize her. She'd lost a significant amount of blood, but miraculously, none of the wounds had struck a vital organ. Doctors said it was a miracle she survived. When she regained consciousness, the first thing she asked was, "Is he gone?" The detective at her bedside nodded. Paul Lambert was dead. She was safe. Angela cried, not out of relief, but disbelief that the man she once loved had turned into a monster capable of this. In the days that followed, she underwent multiple surgeries and a long recovery. The media called her the woman who fought back. Police called her a survivor of one of the most shocking domestic violence cases in Australian history. As the investigation unfolded, details about Paul Lambert's past began to emerge, details Angela had never known. He wasn't just a tradesman from Perth. He was a man with a violent criminal record. He had previously been charged with assault, stalking, and intimidation against other women. There were multiple restraining orders filed against him across different states. He had used false names, changed addresses frequently, and moved to Tasmania to avoid pending charges. He had also been ordered to leave Australia earlier that year. But instead of leaving, he disappeared and resurfaced under a new identity. Every lie he told Angela, from his job to his past, had been crafted to hide who he truly was. When detectives pieced together the timeline, it became clear this wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. Paul had been planning the attack for weeks. The zip ties, duct tape, and gasoline in his car were proof. Angela's courage inspired many women to come forward and report controlling behavior before it escalated. She reminded everyone that violence doesn't start with a knife. It starts with manipulation, control, and fear. If you're still watching, please hit the like button. It won't cost you anything, but helps us a lot. And if you want to hear more real, haunting stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. In Costa Rica, a man's life was destroyed, not by a stranger, but by the woman he once trusted. This is the story of Gerardo Cruz, a young father who became a national hero, and Samody Fonseca, the woman whose twisted revenge would end his life in the most shocking way imaginable. Gerardo Cruz was born in December 1992 in San Jose, Costa Rica. He grew up in a modest home, raised by his mother, Ana Patricia, and his stepfather, Hermes Rodriguez. Gerardo never knew his biological father. He left before Gerardo was even born, but Hermes filled that role with care and discipline. As a child, Gerardo was quiet but kind-hearted. He loved motorcycles, soccer, and spent hours tinkering with engines. Friends remembered him as the guy who always helped others without expecting anything in return. By his early 20s, Gerardo was living a peaceful life. He worked at a local bakery in San Sebastian, a suburb of San Jose. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to take care of the small family he adored, his wife, Carol, and their little daughter, Genesis. At just 23, Gerardo was already a family man. He had responsibilities, dreams, and another baby on the way. Life seemed simple, stable, good, but that illusion of peace was about to be shattered by a woman twice his age, whose beauty hid something far darker. It was the summer of 2015. At the bakery where Gerardo worked, a new customer began to appear. A striking woman, tall, elegant, always dressed to impress. Her name was Samody Fonseca. At 40 years old, Samody was confident and alluring. She loved attention, and she knew exactly how to get it. At first, she was just a regular customer, buying bread, pastries, sometimes chatting with the staff. But soon, her visits became more frequent. She lingered longer, smiled more, and always made sure to speak to Gerardo directly. To his coworkers, it was obvious. This woman was flirting. To Gerardo, it was flattering. Despite being married and expecting another child, Gerardo was young, impressionable, and easily drawn in by Samody's charm. Their conversations grew personal, private, and before long, those friendly exchanges turned into something forbidden. By late summer, they were having an affair, one that Gerardo tried desperately to keep secret. He was living two lives: devoted husband and father at home, reckless lover behind closed doors. But secrets like that don't stay hidden forever. To understand what happened next, you have to know who Samody Fonseca really was. Born in February 1975, Samody grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Costa Rica, raised by her mother, Sonia Fonseca. Even as a child, she was known for her temper and her ability to manipulate people to get what she wanted. In her teens, she was beautiful, confident, and dangerously persuasive. Men were drawn to her, and she knew how to use that to her advantage. Locals remember her as someone who loved luxury and status, but often at someone else's expense. After high school, Samody got a job portraying a life-size Barbie mascot at a major bookstore chain called Universal. Her looks earned her the nickname La Barbie, a name she would proudly carry for the rest of her life. But behind the perfect smile was a woman who couldn't handle rejection. When things didn't go her way, her jealousy turned violent. In her 20s, Samody began dating a well-known television journalist, Osvaldo Fernando Valeri, 16 years her senior. They had 2 children together, Christopher and Christina, but their relationship was volatile. Friends recalled constant fights, fueled by Samodi's jealousy and temper. When Osvaldo left her after years of chaos, she couldn't accept it. After his death in 2012, she broke into his house, changed the locks, and claimed his belongings, forcing the family to take her to court. There were other men too. A pattern began to emerge. Men who dated her ended up either vanishing, dead, or living in fear of her anger. One lover went missing shortly after ending things with her. His body was never found. Another was murdered in what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. Police never proved her involvement, but locals whispered the same name, Samodi. Still, she was never charged, and by 2015, she had moved on to new targets, this time much younger ones. Gerardo's co-workers quickly noticed changes in him. He became distracted, nervous, and often checked his phone at work. Samodi, meanwhile, flaunted her control. She began visiting the bakery daily, sometimes with her teenage daughter, Christina, acting as if she owned the place. For Gerardo, the affair was thrilling at first, but soon it became suffocating. Samodi wanted more time, more attention, more control. She showered him with gifts, sent constant messages, and grew possessive. When rumors of the affair reached Gerardo's mother, she confronted him directly. She warned him that the woman he was seeing was dangerous, but Gerardo brushed it off, insisting it was just a fling. He thought he could end it easily. He was wrong. In October 2015, everything came crashing down. Samodi discovered that Gerardo's wife, Carol, was pregnant again, and she snapped. She began calling and texting Carol, hurling insults and threats. In one message, she warned that if Gerardo didn't leave his wife, she would kill him. Terrified and ashamed, Gerardo confessed everything to Carol. He begged for forgiveness, promising to cut ties with Samodi forever. Carol forgave him. She wanted to believe the nightmare was over. But for Samodi, it was just beginning. To her, the breakup wasn't an ending, it was a betrayal, and betrayal, in her mind, deserved punishment. Just days after the breakup, something unexpected happened that made Gerardo a national figure. While walking downtown, he saw an older man secretly filming under a young woman's skirt. Disgusted, Gerardo confronted him, recording the incident on his phone and exposing the man on social media. The video went viral overnight. The creep turned out to be a former government official named Luis Solano Delgado. Gerardo became a national hero, hailed as a symbol of courage and morality. He appeared on radio shows and TV interviews, calling for respect toward women and justice against predators. But fame brought new problems. The official's lawyers filed a lawsuit accusing Gerardo of defamation and privacy violation. Still, he wasn't afraid. He believed the truth was on his side. What he didn't know was that while he was focused on defending his actions in public, Samodi was plotting his death in private. Unable to accept rejection, Samodi began following Gerardo's every move. She learned his work schedule, his routines, even where his friends lived. Her jealousy transformed into obsession. She started contacting people around him, spreading rumors, twisting stories, making sure everyone knew she wasn't finished with him. Then she made a plan. If she couldn't have him, no one would. On the morning of October 7th, Gerardo woke up early, kissed his daughter goodbye, and left for work like any other day. He had an interview scheduled that evening with a journalist to talk about his viral video. Or so he thought. That afternoon, he received a message. It was from Samodi. She told him the interviewer had changed the location. asked him to meet at a park instead. She sounded calm, friendly, almost supportive. Gerardo hesitated, but eventually agreed. He didn't suspect a thing. After all, this was someone he'd once trusted. That night, after finishing his shift at the bakery, Gerardo texted his friend that he couldn't make their usual meetup. He had something important to do. He never said what. At around 8 p.m., he headed toward the park. Streetlights flickered. The air was still. Gerardo Cruz walked through the dimly lit park, unaware that every step was being watched. Hidden in the shadows, two men waited. Men who weren't there for an interview, but for blood. Moments later, Gerardo's phone buzzed. A message from Samodi read, "I'm already here. Come toward the fountain." He followed the directions, scanning the dark corners, expecting to see cameras or journalists. But instead, two figures appeared behind him. Before he could react, they attacked. One man struck him. The other pulled a knife. In seconds, Gerardo was stabbed repeatedly in the chest and abdomen. His bag and jacket were ripped from him as he collapsed onto the ground, bleeding and gasping for air. Through sheer willpower, he reached for his phone, his last lifeline. He called his friend, whispering, "They stabbed me. Call the police." Then the line went silent. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Gerardo was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his body pierced by multiple stab wounds. News spread fast. The man who had once been hailed as a hero was now fighting for his life. Costa Rica watched in horror as daily updates about his condition filled TV screens and newspapers. For 42 days, doctors fought to save him. He underwent surgery after surgery, but the damage was too severe. On November 19th, 2015, Gerardo Cruz died from his injuries. He was just 22 years old. His death broke the hearts of millions. Vigils were held across the country. Candles flickered in the streets, and people demanded justice. The media mourned a young man who stood for truth and courage, never realizing that his killer wasn't a political enemy, but someone much closer. At first, investigators believed it was a robbery gone wrong. Gerardo's bag and jacket were missing, and the attack happened in a public park. It looked like a random act of violence, but detectives noticed something strange. The attackers didn't take his phone or wallet, only his bag and jacket. It felt deliberate, staged. Then came another theory. Many suspected the former official Gerardo had exposed online. Luis Solano Delgado. Some believe Delgado had hired hitmen to silence the young man who ruined his career. Protests erupted, demanding Delgado's arrest, but investigators couldn't find any evidence connecting him to the attack. For months, the case went cold. No arrests, no solid leads, just grief, anger, and questions. Everything changed in May 2016. When police uncovered new CCTV footage from a nearby street camera. It showed two men sprinting away from the park right after the attack. The footage was grainy, but their faces were visible enough for detectives to circulate the images on national television. Look closely, police urged the public. These could be Gerardo's killers. Days later, one of the men surrendered himself to authorities. He was young, terrified, and willing to talk in exchange for a lighter sentence. His confession cracked the case wide open. Under questioning, the man revealed everything. The attack, he said, was no robbery. It was a murder for hire. And the person who ordered it? Samodi Fonsek. She had orchestrated the entire thing. The messages, the location, even the stolen bag and jacket, all part of her plan to make the killing look like a random assault. Investigators dug deeper, tracing phone records and text messages. What they found left them speechless. Hundreds of messages between Samodi, Her daughter Cristina and several accomplices outlined the murder plot step by step. Samodi had planned everything meticulously. She used her daughter as her right hand. Together, they recruited a cab driver named Ronald Archie and an intermediary, Cesar Chavez, to find hitmen willing to carry out the killing. Another accomplice, Omar Acosta, was assigned to follow Gerardo and update the group on his movements. The night of October 7th, every participant played their role like actors in a deadly play. Samodi stayed home, sending final instructions from her phone. Cristina coordinated the others. And when Gerardo's blood stained the ground, the killers took his jacket and bag. To prove the job was done, armed with undeniable evidence, police moved in. Samodi and her daughter were arrested first. Then the rest, Ronald, Cesar, and Omar, followed within days. During interrogation, their stories aligned perfectly with the digital trail investigators had already mapped out. The murder had been driven by one thing: jealousy. Samodi couldn't stand the thought of Gerardo returning to his wife. In her mind, if she couldn't have him, no one could. When officers searched her phone, they found chilling messages detailing the plan: where to meet, how to make it look like a robbery, and how to deliver proof afterward. She never deleted them. She thought she was untouchable. The case shocked Costa Rica. A respected young man had been lured and murdered, not by criminals, but by a woman he once loved. The investigation lasted over a year. Finally, in December 2017, the trial began. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, cameras, and a grieving family who wanted answers. Every piece of evidence pointed back to Samodi: text messages, call logs, and testimony from her own accomplices. But as the trial unfolded, even more of her dark past surfaced. It turned out this wasn't her first brush with the law. Years earlier, she'd been charged with forging documents to receive government benefits, earning her a suspended sentence. She'd also faked paternity documents to claim child support from a former lover, Miguel Angel Perez, for years. When the fraud was discovered, she was sentenced to 3 years, but never served time due to having a young child. The court saw a pattern: a woman who lied, manipulated, and used others for her own gain. Gerardo's wife, Carol, took the stand. Through tears, she recounted how Samodi had threatened to kill her husband if he didn't end his marriage. She begged the court to give her husband justice. Then came the accomplices. Ronald and Cesar confessed their roles, describing how Samodi had promised payment and demanded proof that the job was done. Cristina's involvement became undeniable. She had sent messages coordinating times, confirming her mother's instructions, and even panicking after seeing surveillance footage of the attackers on TV. In one emotional moment, prosecutors read a transcript of a phone call between mother and daughter after the footage aired. Cristina was crying, terrified, ready to confess. But Samodi calmed her down, saying, "They'll never find us." Those words sealed her fate. On January 23, 2018, the courtroom fell silent as the judge read the verdict. Samodi Fonseca was found guilty of orchestrating the murder of Gerardo Cruz. Her daughter, Cristina, and accomplices Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez were also convicted. The sentences were harsh. Samodi Fonseca, 30 years in prison. Cristina Fonseca, 25 years. Ronald Archie, 25 years. Cesar Chavez, 25 years. Omar Acosta, who had only followed the victim, was acquitted. One of the teenage attackers was sent to juvenile detention. The other was never found. When the verdict was announced, Gerardo's family wept. They finally had justice, though no punishment could bring him back. The court also ordered compensation, over $140,000 to Gerardo's family for moral damages. But the story didn't end there. In 2019, Samodi and her daughter appealed their sentences, claiming the punishment was excessive. The appeals court reviewed the case and reduced each sentence by 5 years. Still, the evidence was overwhelming. The conviction stood. Samodi would spend 25 years behind bars, and her daughter the same. Inside prison, Samodi remained as manipulative as ever. In 2020, she made headlines again, this time for marrying another inmate, a woman named Lindsay Diaz-Lopez. Lindsay was released on parole shortly after, leaving Samodi to serve out her decades-long sentence alone. Even behind bars, La Barbie continued to attract attention, still craving the control and admiration that once defined her life. The murder of Gerardo Cruz wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a story of ego, obsession, and vengeance. A young man who tried to do the right thing was taken down by the darkest part of human nature. His story serves as a reminder that jealousy, when left unchecked, can destroy everything it touches. It blinds, it burns, and it kills. Gerardo's courage had once inspired a nation, and even in death, his legacy lives on, reminding Costa Rica of the price of integrity and the danger of trusting the wrong person. This was the case of Samodi Fonseca, the woman who turned love into murder, and the story of Gerardo Cruz, whose bravery made him a hero, and whose kindness made him a target. If this case moved you, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more cases like this.